Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the DX Mentor, all about RTTY. Thank you for being with us. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. We have a back catalog of over 50 episodes covering many aspects of DX in both podcast and YouTube format. Please check us out. If you are new to DXing, I would really recommend episode 1 as it was recorded with several world-class DXers. You will get a feel for the excitement that goes with chasing DX. And remember, if you like what you find, please subscribe, like, and share. I would sure appreciate it. Another way to keep in touch and see what we're up to is via the DX Mentor Facebook page. I will be posting about upcoming podcasts as well as other DX events, so please check it out. As you know, we've been dormant for several weeks, and finally, Joe and I are back and have a list of guests for upcoming podcasts that is just great. I'm glad you're along for the ride. Our guest today is Ed, W0YK. As always, Joe, W0YK, an accomplished DXer in his own right, will also be with us. Here's a brief biography of our guest, Ed, W0YK. Quote, I was first licensed as a novice in Riverside, California as WN6AYK in 1962. I then upgraded to technician, then general in 1963 as WB6AYK. I worked mostly CWDXing on 40 meters into the Pacific and Asia, primarily Japan, during high school and junior high. I let my license expire while I focused on math and engineering in undergraduate and graduate studies. In 1972, I visited the FCC office in Denver, Colorado, and took the novice, technician, general, advanced, and extra exams, written and code, one morning and early afternoon. I was granted WB0WNU, which was later exchanged for the current W0YK during the initial incentive licensing release of the 1x2 call signs in 1976. I found lots of DX during contests and then got hooked on contesting itself. I learned a lot in the early days at the K0RF multi station. Since then, contesting has been my primary activity with some DXing in between. Thanks to a club effort to win the club competition gavel in the ARRL RTTY Roundup in 2004, I got hooked on RTTY contesting on top of my CW contesting. I've been traveling to Aruba since 2005 for the RTTY Roundup, CQWPX RTTY, and the CQ Worldwide RTTY, each year as P49 X-Ray. I also joined some CW multi-ops with W6LD as P40L once every couple of years or so in the ARL DX, CQWPX, and/or the CQ Worldwide contests. I'm the director for the CQ RTTY contests, which are the CQ RTTY, Worldwide RTTY and CQWPX RTTY, and the WWDigi sponsored by the WWROF and SCC organizations. I'm also the contest manager for the NCJ RTTY Sprint. I co-sponsored the 10-meter RTTY contest with Don, AA5AU. I'm licensed in Japan as 7 Juliet 1 Alpha Charlie Juliet, and I have also operated from Syria, Jamaica, and the Galapagos Islands, end quote. And that is just a short summary. He's a great entertaining guest, very knowledgeable, and I know you're going to like it. So without any further delay, let's get started. Well, good evening and welcome to the latest edition of the DX Mentor. This is the first one in 2025, and Joe and I made it through the cold weather in Southwest Ohio, and we're ready to go. And by golly, are we excited tonight. We have a premier contester, DXer, and a RTTY digital guy when it was digital before digital was a fad, you might say. So we're really excited to get Ed on with us. But first of all, Joe, quick introduction and bring us up to date on what you're doing.
Well, real good. I got started when I was about 15 as an SWL and finally got my tech license, came up through the line. Back in my technician days, I really got hooked on DXing into the Caribbean. And ever since then, I am just 100% a DXer. I get on the radio every day. So, and thank the good Lord, I feel pretty good now, but I've had COVID again for the third time. So I'm sort of tired of getting COVID. So tell us about yourself, Ed.
Well, like you and I think many of us, I started at a young age. I got my novice license at 12, and it's hard for me to remember exactly how I got to that point, but I was interested in electronics and electrical things, and I had done the proverbial crystal radio thing that was just fascinating to me, that you had two or three parts and you could scratch this piece of quartz crystal and hear radio stations around.
Yeah.
So that maybe was kind of the first thing. But I was in Boy Scouts and had, I got all the awards, the Eagle Scout, the God and Country Award, Order of the Arrow, almost all the merit badges. And one of the merit badges was radio, and my scoutmaster was a ham. He wasn't a HF ham. He was on 2 meters and 6 meters, and that was kind of mildly interesting to me. But what was really interesting was, was HF. So as a novice, I got started and got my technician and my general. And I grew up in Southern California, where all the fires are this week. And so before school, I'd get up at 4 in the morning, and my dad helped me put up a 40-foot telescope and, push-up mast with a 40-meter inverted V on it. And I worked CW into Asia, which is pretty easy from California, of course. And just loved that. And I spent my, junior high and high school mornings before school, and that was kind of my ham radio. And my first contact, like all of us, was probably 15 miles away in Monrovia or something, and I just thought that was fantastic. But the first DX contact I had was with Juliet Alpha 1 X-Ray Sierra, and he was in his mid-20s, had just graduated from college, and was a young engineer at Sony Corporation. And he and his wife and his eventually two daughters became very close personal friends of ours. But what I'll never forget is this was the first out of California station I worked. And 2 days later, I got a direct QSL card from him because we had chatted and he knew that I was a young ham and it was his first DX. And so that was the kind of bonding experience I think all of us have had many times over probably in this hobby. And that was how I got started. And then when I went to college, I got really busy with just trying to do my college work. And ham radio really slid. I didn't do any ham radio much at all. And once I got out and started my career at Hewlett Packard, my wife and I were going to take a vacation one time, and so I was probably in my late 20s at that point. My license had expired. I'd forgotten all about it, but I had all of the equipment that I'd had as a youngster was stored in boxes in the garage. So anyway, we were going to go on this trip, and I had been carpooling with a friend at work, and he had a CB in his car, and I thought, wow, that's really slick. We should get one of those for our trip in case we get into trouble or we want to ask where the best, cheapest gasoline is or whatever, or while we're driving. And I was actually in the driveway installing the antenna in this thing in my car, and the proverbial light bulb went off from the top of my head and said, wait a minute, you've got all this ham radio equipment in the garage, including some 2-meter, mobile rigs. Why don't you get your license and do that? So I actually undid the installation, put it back in the package, drove back to the store, got my money back, came back, dug out a receiver, threw a wire out the window, and started listening to W0YK code practice to get my code back. And 2 weeks later, I went down to Denver. At that time, we had moved to Colorado with HP, and went down to Denver, and there were about 30 people there to get their license. And so I got my novice, and then I stayed and got my technician, and then I took the 13 word per minute and got the general. And by 2 o'clock, I was the only one left, and I passed my extra.
Wow.
And so, a couple weeks later, I got Whiskey Bravo Zero Whiskey November uniform. And about a year after that, the FCC opened up the incentive licensing, and that's where I got the W0YK call. And even though I moved back to California 30 years ago, everyone knows me by that call, and it doesn't make much difference to the FCC anymore. So
Yeah.
I just hung on to it.
So who did you work? I was with HP for 16 years. So
Oh, really?
I did workstation support at General Electric Aircraft and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I was out to Colorado Springs all the time.
Okay. Well, I worked in the workstation area. So I started at HP in a medical electronics area, and I worked there for 3 years, and then transferred out to Colorado, and that's where the HP workstation operation was. And so I worked in that for gosh, about 16 years, and then kicking and screaming, I came back to California. I really wanted to stay in Colorado, and we lived out in the country and so forth. But I was fortunate enough when I came back to find this place. We have 80 acres here on a ridgetop
Wow.
overlooking Monterey Bay. So even though I'm in a near a metropolis, I'm in a very rural area. In fact, it's so rural um, we have weather problems and we have delivery problems. And the last 3 miles of the road up here is a one-lane road on the side of a cliff with two-way traffic, but not very much traffic. So
Wow.
it's pretty rustic and rural up here. And I run a vineyard. We planted about 13 acres of Pinot Noir and a little bit of Syrah. And so that's what my second career is now.
Very cool. So were you in Fort Collins then?
I started in Loveland, and then we built the Fort Collins facility. I worked there, and then Greeley was built, but I left from Fort Collins. Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
I saw Mr. Packard from across the lunchroom at Fort Collins. I didn't meet him, but he was
Yeah.
over there with a bunch of people, and everybody was like, "Oh, look, there's Dave Packard," and that was so cool. That was so,
Well, I'll go you one better. You know, a decade or so before that, Hewlett and Packard individually went around once a year and sat down with every engineer in the company at their bench for 30 minutes and just talked to them about what they were working on and that sort of thing. And that was the kind of environment that I hired into in the late 60s. And of course, that's you wouldn't even recognize the company now, but that's what it was like then. And so we saw them at least once a year in annual reviews and in this walk around that they did. You know, I'm sure you remember the big thing that Packard would say is management by wandering around,
yeah.
and he wanted all the managers to be out, you know, working with the people, not just sitting in their desk issuing instructions.
We're going off track, but I can't tell you how many times 30 years later now, after leaving HP, I've done things and somebody said, "How did you know to do that?" I said, I picked that up from Fort Collins division, or I picked that up from Logic Systems division, or I got it here, got it. It was amazing the training we got and just the people you were working with. And anyway, but I digress.
I agree. I agree. Well, you can cut that part out.
Yeah. No, no, no. The other point you made, though, I always go back. I had worked as a novice. I had worked almost all the states out west. I worked Alaska and Hawaii. And then I worked a VE3 FGO in Canada. And that was my first DX. And I was doing backflips. But when you look at the map, it was far closer than the majority of, but it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. So at some point, though, you became DX. Right? I mean, you were in Japan, Syria, Jamaica,
I
Galapagos, I
did.
think a few other. What are some highlights of those experiences?
Well, the Japan situation was from the story I told earlier, my friend, the Takasawas. And so I got a local license over there. And whenever I traveled over there and visited them, then I would operate there. I didn't do a lot of operating. They lived in a small apartment on the 13th floor of a high rise and, had a mobile antenna on the balcony. That was how he DX'd and worked all over the world. And so that was kind of limited experience there. I worked for HP in Singapore for 2 years in the early 70s, but I didn't do any ham radio at that time. I was pretty busy with my work and didn't do any ham radio. The Jamaica situation was Team Vertical, which you may have heard about. Tom Schiller in 6BV and Kenny Silverman K2KW put together a number of D expeditions. In fact, Kenny's still doing it, where they go down into the Caribbean. They get on the north side of an island on the beach, and they set up verticals in the sometimes in the salt water. The surf is actually coming into the base of the mount of the vertical. And we had a number of times where we had some pretty severe arcing and so forth. But that the gain phenomenon from that kind of a location, having your antennas actually on salt water is just tremendous. We did one trip, which was QRP. We did CQ Worldwide Contest, CW. We took K2 radios down there, and we all operated single band 5 watts. And I wound up on 40 meters and set the world record at the time on 40 meters on 5 watts QRP. And believe it or not, so we had 2-element vertical beams, one on Europe and one on North America. And in the evening, when you would expect Europe to just be running you off the band, they would try to encroach on my frequency, and I'd just keep working stations and chase them away just by virtue of the signal strength with just 5 watts. And that was a really thrilling experience, but a very memorable one in terms of you don't have to have 10 kilowatts to have a big signal. You just have to be in the right location.
So what island were you on with Ken?
This was all Jamaica. This is all on the north coast of Jamaica.
Okay, he used to, I might be all messed up here, but this is interesting conversation. He was a club member, and I remember him because I've been all over the Caribbean DXing, and I thought it was in the Bahamas, but maybe it was Jamaica. And he and his group would go down there and operate. Then they would put the antennas under the house. Then when they went back next year, pull the antennas out and start all over again. So does that sound familiar with you?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in Jamaica. They made several trips in Jamaica, but Kenny has done this on 3 or 4 different islands down there.
Okay.
The last 2 years, he's done an operation on the ARRL 10-meter contest in December from see what's the call VP2 VHH or something like that. I forget, but anyway, they've done a nice operation down there. Low power, no amps, but verticals on the beat, same kind of setup. And usually what he does if he finds a good place is stores the equipment down there. But these verticals, we have a picture of Tom Schiller holding with his arms out, holding 10 meters through 160 in his arms. They were all the antennas were designed cut up into 4-foot sections, and all the tubing would fit inside a golf bag or one of those semi-rigid, golf bags that you travel with.
Yes.
And carriers, and the coax. And if for low power, if you don't take amplifiers, you can make it pretty lightweight. But you're right, he did store things down there when they went back multiple times.
Yeah, he was a club member for several years. Do you remember him, Bill?
I don't.
No? Okay.
So you've operated from a Caribbean lot, and you said the call alone is like a multiplier or 3 to 5 dB gain into Asia, right?
Yeah, well, the location, the physical location is great. West Africa and the Caribbean, you're sitting over saltwater, a huge saltwater path into the biggest populations in the world, right? Europe and North America. And so that's where, an ideal location. Now, if you want to work all over the world, that's not necessarily the best location. But the call sign certainly does. It does generate pileups. Although I have to say, and I guess we'll get into this later when we start talking about RTTY, in the last few years, if I go down there and prepare for a contest and I'm working, testing the station during the week, I'm lucky if I can work 40 or 50 stations in an entire week. There just is nobody on. Everyone's on FT8, and there's just nobody on the bands. And used to be I could work several thousand stations, leading up to the contest. But getting back to Kenny, you may remember him, Bill, as I think it was Whiskey Mike 2 Charlie was his call. And I think when he was in well, it probably was when he was in Ohio, because when he was out here in our club in California, I think he still had that call and got the K2 KW call when he was out here, and then since moved to Is he in Florida now or South Carolina?
I just
Somewhere.
put him up on my database, and he's in Virginia.
Okay.
That's right, Virginia now.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't recall, I talked to him many times at club meetings and shooting the bull and all that, guys, but I don't recall what he was doing in Ohio. Maybe working at Wright-Patterson because so many people around Dayton do.
He
Uh,
worked for Verizon. He was an engineer at Verizon.
Really?
okay,
Wow.
okay.
So Joe, you have been on the other side. You're the guy working all the FT8 that Ed's not seeing, or Ed's not seeing the RTTY because they're all working you on FT8 when you're down there, right?
I get up every morning at 5 o'clock. We're getting off the subject. I'm sorry, but I get up early, Ed, and then I usually do 30, 40, and 80 just about every morning, but all FT8 because, like you said, that's where everybody's at.
Well, that's right. You turn on your radio, and the only activity is that 2 or 3 kilohertz on each
Yeah,
band.
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I'm a big, or I think I am a big 6 meter guy, and I'll get on just about every day if I watch the cluster, and there's nobody on sideband or CW like there were years and years ago.
No, you're
And
right.
you go to FT8, and it is just absolutely wall to wall. So
Yeah,
that's where we all go to make contacts.
So
that's
Ed, how
really
did
funny. Everyone's sitting in that 2 to 3 kilohertz QRM in each other, and the rest of the band's empty.
Yeah,
absolutely wide? Yep.
yeah,
So how did
exactly.
you make the jump into contesting?
Well, from DXing, I quickly figured out that there's a lot of DX that's on during contests. In fact, a lot of the expeditions that are only, that country is rarely on outside of contests. And so that got me spending time in contests. And I realized for the amount of time I spent on the air, I could work a lot more DX and a lot more stations. And so pretty soon, I very quickly kind of converted from DXing to contesting in terms of where I spent my time and where I enjoyed operating. I love DXing, but there's so much more activity during a contest, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I ended up in contesting. So I don't have great DX. I'm on the honor roll, but don't have great DX. I've missed countries that have come and gone at times and so forth. So I need to catch up on that. But again, I'm working full time in this vineyard and doing a lot of contesting, and there just isn't a lot of time left.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Joe and I have talked a couple times about the challenge of a contest weekend, because if you're like I consider myself to be an average station, well, that's a great opportunity for me. But there was one particular year that I was after Tunisia. I didn't have Tunisia yet. I thought, okay, I know there's a big push. I'm not even going to look at Friday night because everyone wants those multipliers. We get into Saturday. They were still busy. All right, I'm going to wait till Sunday. I'm smart. I'm going to wait till Sunday and I'll get them easy because when you're on Sunday, sometimes
yeah,
you really can. And then the
Yeah.
sun didn't cooperate and the bottom fell out and it was like another 2 years before I got it. So now I do both. I get in and work them and wait till Sunday and work them. So
yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times on a contest weekend that's happened where um, you wait till Sunday or you think you can make up something on Sunday and propagation changes radically
yeah,
between Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
it's crazy. So let's maybe switch gears to RTTY then, because you're kind of known as a RTTY guy. I have done some RTTY. The problem I have is that kind of what you've already described. It's like I usually get a half hour to an hour a night. I'm down in the shack. I like to work CW, but I will go listen for RTTY, and there's not a lot there. And I do
Yep.
call CQ. I don't just rely on, and some maybe I'll bet I average 5 or 6 QSOs a month with outside the contest. So I know previously it wasn't like that. So what is it
It
you
was.
like about, maybe describe RTTY a little bit? What is it you like about it, and what's all behind it?
Well, this is this is an interesting story because um, back in 2003, our club, well, in 2004, the RTTY Roundup, the ARRL initiated the club competition gavel for RTTY Roundup in 2004, I believe. And so in 2003, the RTTY operators in our contest club, and I think it was in the September meeting, made a presentation on RTTY, and their goal was to motivate and entice all of us non-RTTY operators to get on and operate. And I had never operated RTTY before that time. So I listened to this presentation, and they explained how the software decodes the calls and highlights them and prints them on the screen. And I'm listening to that. I'm a CW operator, right? I'm listening to all this, and they get through, and I raise my hand and I say, let me understand this right. The software decodes everything, prints it out. It could just as easily stick it in the log. I said, I could just set this up and go in the other room and drink a beer and let the computer operate my station, right? This was, 20 years ago. Of course, now this is a reality. And they said, oh, no, Ed. And so they really gave me a bad time. And then I felt bad, felt very embarrassed about being critical. So I felt like I had to get on. So I went home and I wired up some FSK cables for a Kenwood TS 950 and got on RTTY Roundup, and I won the Pacific Division
Oh my goodness.
in RTTY Roundup. First time I'd ever operated it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember about that is that for the next 48 hours, Monday and Tuesday at work, my ears were ringing with RTTY, because what I didn't know at that time, and what I say in all my presentations now today, is you don't need to hear the audio like you do for sideband or CW, because you're not going to copy it. You just need to hear enough of the audio to know when it starts and stops, when the signal starts and stops, so you can, for timing, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have it too loud, not only is it very fatiguing, but you really will have it ringing in your ears for a number of hours afterwards. So that got me started. And then I think that same year, two friends of mine in the club here purchased a ham radio station down in Aruba from Carl Cook, a AI6V. And so my wife and I went down there on a vacation, and I did very little operating, even though it was all set up to operate, because I was with my wife and I wanted to, have a nice vacation for her. But that kind of got me intrigued. So the next year I went back and I operated the RTTY Roundup from down there. Totally different experience, of course. And I came in second place in Aruba. There was a station there, a local station that actually had won the contest a number of years in a row. And he had, as I remember, like 10% more QSOs and score and everything than I did. And of course, I was a complete novice at it, but I was bound and determined to do better, to learn. So we went out to dinner and I talked to him about some of the things he did and learned some of the tips and tricks and so forth. And I went back the next year and won it, for the world. And I've won it every year since then. So that's how I got into RTTY. I was kicking and screaming, did not want to do it. And I guess what I would say, it's not necessarily my favorite mode, although most people think it is, because I'm known for operating RTTY.
Right.
But I enjoy the diversity. I enjoy the diversity of modes. Probably my least favorite mode are the FT modes, but I operate a lot of it because that's, as we were talking earlier, where the activity is. And I enjoy it for the diversity aspect as well. It's completely different. If you try to compare modes like RTTY to CW, or especially FT8 to any of the other modes, you're going to be disappointed. I mean, they're totally different animals. It's like comparing Diet Coke to iced tea or something. They're different drinks. And so I just enjoy the diversity of the different modes. And I think it's helped me maintain a higher level of interest in the hobby by having that diversity. So that's, I guess, what I would say. But I do enjoy RTTY. There's something addictive and intriguing about it. And I can't really put my finger on it, but I do enjoy it.
So if a person was going to start into RTTY, what coaching would you give them? I mean, I'm hoping somebody listens and say, that I've heard it on the air. That sounds pretty cool. I'd like to give that a try.
Yeah. Um, the first thing I would do is I would send them to Don Hill's website, riddycontesting.com.
Okay, which
He's
I'll
got,
put in the show notes.
yeah, riddycontesting.com. Um, he's got wonderful tutorials on setting up RTTY, both FSK and AFSK. He's got extensive tutorials on the two major decoders that are being used, MMTTY and two-tone, and also the two main loggers that are used in RTTY DXing and contesting, which are N1MM and right log. So I highly encourage people to do that. Usually through your local club, there will be a group of people that are RTTY operators. And one of the things that I find really great is to see if you can get invited to a multi-op, a RTTY multi-op. And nowadays there are a lot of stations that you can get on remotely. So there's a new station down in Tennessee, NJ4P. I don't know if they're mostly on contests, so you might not have run into them outside of contests. And this is a couple that have a towing business and have large equipment, and they built a huge station down there, and it's remoted, and they do multi-two and multi-single. And other than them, all the other operators, there's VE5MX up in Canada and people all over the U.S. Some of our club members out here have operated with them, and they operate a remote. And that's a great way to learn anything, with respect to operating, but especially RTTY to be able to operate alongside and be in a team like that. And then, we were talking earlier about nowadays RTTY, you can't even get on and test your equipment. But there are 2 to 3 RTTY contests a month, and they're on the weekends.
Okay.
So that's an opportunity to get on and try out your station. And then every Thursday night for 30 minutes, there's the weekly RTTY test, and it's just 30 minutes. It's a little contest. You post your scores on 3830 scores. And it's not anything serious, but it's just for the purpose that we're talking about, being able to practice. And in fact, there's an FT8 version of that just 45 minutes before the RTTY version. So those are time frames when you can operate. And of course, for receive, the ARRL has their bulletins on RTTY a couple times a day, every day of the week, I think. And so that's another good opportunity to get on and at least test the receive side of your setup.
Okay. So that sounds a little bit like the CW Ops weekly test,
Exactly.
CWT, right? Okay.
Exactly. Same idea.
I can remember my roommate at college, K1FJ. Frank was coming out for his second year and he was into RTTY, and I'm thinking, oh, I've been reading about these little demodulators. Oh, no. Frank had a Model 15 in the back of his car, and we wheeled that thing up into his room. And, over time he had they used to do the calendars and they'd print all that out, and he had rolls of the tapes that you would use, and there were paper punches all over. But there was something really cool about it. It was kind of like going back into the 1940s when newspapers were a big deal, Go ahead, Joe.
So talking about the Big 15, and for our listeners, what would someone have to do today to get on RTTY? What about the radio, the programs, so forth?
Yeah. Well, the RTTY programs that do the demodulation and encoding, the modulation to transmit, are all free. The two main ones that we all use are MMTTY, which was introduced in 2000 by a Japanese ham, and it's an excellent program. It's been kind of the mainstay of RTTY since then. And then in 2013, I think it was, or 2011 maybe, David Wicks over in the UK came out with two-tone. And initially it was just available with N1MM, but it since is now available on RightLog and WinTest and other contests. So those two are free. We'll do all of the software side. And then most loggers, whether it's contest loggers or like what's the one that Dave Bernstein does, DX Lab.
Yep.
Yeah, all of the almost every logger now supports those two software programs. So whatever logger you're using, you can just get those, download those free. And for the radio, if you have a current generation radio, it's almost trivial to set up for RTTY. And if you're doing well, first of all, I'd say if you're Joe, you're doing FT8, you're all set up for RTTY. All you need is the program
Yes.
and to have the different modulation. But the cables and everything you have set up for FT8 will work fine for RTTY. Now, there's a different way. There are two different ways to transmit RTTY. And one way is using audio into the transmitter, like we do with FT8. And so that's why I say your setup will work fine. I use the second way, which is called FSK, and it's done with keying like you would for CW. So for CW, you either have a keyer, or if the CW is being generated by the computer, it's going out a serial port, or today USB, and the serial signals are running the CW into the CW jack on your radio. So most modern radios, if you look in the manual or look on the back, there will be an FSK input, and you would use that if you wanted to use the second way of transmitting, which is direct keying as opposed to feeding audio into the sideband transmitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm a CW op, I know there's a couple ways I can kind of break a pile up. There's tail ending, there's trying to time your call correctly, there's listening up, listening down, there's a couple things that we all do. Are there any tricks in RTTY? I've used it, but I'm limited enough where to me it always seems like whoever's loudest gets it. But I know there's got to be more to that.
Well, it is, excuse me, it is whoever is loudest gets it, because in RTTY, excuse me, you can't, unlike CW, you can't call off frequency and have it, the demodulator degrades rapidly when you're not 0 beat, right? So that's kind of the bad news. The good news is, even still today, there are huge pauses that you can dump your call in. So what I would say is the number one thing is to learn timing. And the same thing applies to CW. You know that timing is everything. But you do have the advantage in CW of calling off frequency. And a lot of times that's the only way you can get through a pileup, is to be off frequency from where everybody is. But in RTTY, the key is timing. And there are pauses in time you can drive a truck through to drop your call in. So I advise people, rather than send your call 3 times, send it once, listen for a beat, a fraction of a second, and just try to keep sending your call once at the right time. That's the fastest way to get through, and to make sure that you're 0 beat with the station you're calling. Okay, so that's what I would say, and that seems to work the best.
Cool. Joe, did you have a question? I didn't want to run over.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so the little homework, not a little homework, but the homework I did on the RTTY contest. On one hand, you don't hear as much, on the air. But on the other hand, it seems like every year there's more logs uploaded for RTTY contests. Is that just my perception, or is that true?
It's I would put it in the old wives' tale category.
Okay.
So in addition to operating contests, I'm actually the log checker and the contest manager for almost all of the RTTY contests, all the CQ contests. Right now, I'm log checking the RTTY roundup, and I do the ARRL International DX. And Don Hill and I sponsor a FT contest the beginning of December. So, and I do the sprints, the RTTY sprints, twice a year. So I'm doing about 8 or 9 of the contests and all the major ones. And so remind me, what was your initial question?
It seems like there's more logs turned in.
Oh, the activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had heard that. And so the lead in, what I was trying to get to, and then forgot my train of thought, was that I have all this data for 20 years. I can tell you what the log rate is, and it's increased a little bit. But number one, it's not increased as much as CW and sideband have in, for example, the CQ worldwide contest. I had people telling me, oh, RTTY's taking over CW in popularity and so forth. And that's not true. I think how we got fooled about that was that RTTY did in the last 20 years really increase in popularity. I mean, a lot of hams like me that were in other modes started getting on RTTY. It wasn't just the RTTY only people. And so it appeared, we had this myth that it seemed like RTTY was more popular, but the data doesn't support that.
Okay.
But what is interesting is in July, I have a graph that's just blows your mind. In July of 2017, FT8 was introduced. And I have a graph of the QSOs submitted to Club Log during 2017. And so without FT8 for the first half of the year, all the CW and sideband was up at the top, and you could there was what were the modes before FT? JT
65.
something.
JT 65.
Yeah, and a few of the other modes, and they were all there. Literally on July 17th or whenever it was that FT8 was introduced, within 2 weeks, all of those graphs that were going across went straight down, and FT8 went straight up, and it's been that way since.
Wow.
And it's just the transition. So not only was it amazing how FT8, took the activity, but the transition time was literally weeks. It was literally a handful of weeks. It was just incredible.
Huh.
So that's a little bit of a sidetrack, but that took all the wind out of RTTY. And today, it's very rare that a DXpedition even operates any RTTY, and if they do, it's secondary, to FT8. I was lucky enough to work Clipperton when they were on this last time. I just happened to be around and got on when Chris in 6WM, who was on the team, got on and worked RTTY, and the team didn't want to work any RTTY, and so he kind of got in trouble for doing it. And he worked for, I don't know, half an hour, and I happened to get through and working during that session. But that's the exception. It's just it just doesn't pay to to get QSOs in the log, because RTTY it's so hard. For the point that started this segment about the QRM that you were talking about, Bill, from a DXpedition standpoint, the rate is really slow. I mean, you have to use really special techniques to get the rate up. And with FT8, you can run multiple streams. One guy can run 2 bands at the same time, so one operator. I mean, it's so efficient. But for us that have been doing ham radio for 60 or 70 years, it doesn't seem like the ham radio that we, came into the hobby with. It's a bit different. Computers working computers.
I kind of walk both sides of it, because there's 2 thoughts. One is ICOM is not going to design and build no radios if no one's on the air, right? So FT8 really gave that spark. They can all sit back and look at equipment sold and all those other things because of it. And it is absolutely cool technology, the whole bit. So, okay, that's the upside. Interestingly enough, though, I had 168 confirmed on RTTY. And I felt, at the time, I thought, oh, well, I'll never get to 300, 168 I should feel good about. Well, now looking back, I feel really good about it, because you can do 100 FT8 in a weekend. You can do, work 100 FT8 entities. So to have 168 in the 80s and 90s, I feel pretty good about it now. So, it's all perspective, right? It's all what you want to do with it. And so one thing that I don't know why, Ed, I don't consider myself a coward, but I cannot get into a sprint, whether it's CW or RTTY. It's something really is intimidating to me. So can you explain what a sprint is, and then how should I be attacking it?
Yeah, so the sprint is a special contest format that was designed to really um, exercise and stress and test one's operating ability. So if you think about how we operate, there's kind of two basic modes, right? You sit on a frequency and call CQ and stations come to you, or you tune around like we do mostly for DXing, right? If you're DX, you CQ, but if you're on this side, you tune around. And so those are kind of the two basic modes. And the sprint was designed to really increase your skill at those two modes because you have to context switch between them so much. So basically, the sprint rules are set up such that it encourages you. It's not required, by the way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And that's how you can, I think, ease into it. But you read the rules and you think, my God, I've got to first of all break a pileup. And if I don't break a pileup, that station is going to be gone the next time because the person that's CQing has to leave the frequency. And so it's really discouraging and frustrating if you're not a big station and can break that first pileup. If you ever do break the pileup, then you get to work one more station on that frequency before you got to QSY and find another pileup that you're going to get beat out on. Okay. And so especially if you're a small station, it's extremely frustrating to be jumping between those two modes because every other QSO has to be breaking a pileup and everyone else is trying to break it in the contests. So there are a number of things, and numbers have written articles about how to kind of transition or ease into sprint. But I think the first thing is to make sure that you even want to do this. And so you need to kind of think about what's your interest in sprint. And for me, the interest is what I just said initially, is that it's probably the most difficult operating challenge. And so it makes all my other operating almost in my sleep if I can do a sprint well, because you get all the muscle memory and everything between your brain and everything that you're doing operating your station in the sprint mode. So I highly recommend people to get into it, but don't get into it if you're just going to be frustrated by it. You need to get mentally in the space that says, okay, I don't expect to do good right away, but I think this is going to be good for me in the long term. So I'm going to learn how to do this. So some techniques to do is you can call CQ yourself all the time and let the pileup come to you. The rules don't say that you have to break pileups. So what you do is you just find a clear frequency and call CQ, and whatever you can copy, you work them, and then you change stations again. So what I tell people is most rigs now have two receivers, and you have to QS. One of the rules is you have to QSY at least 5 kilohertz before you CQ again. Okay. So set them 10 kilohertz apart. In fact, set them above where all the activity, a little bit above where all the activity is, and a little bit below, so that you have less QRM. And just as soon as you finish your QSO, tap your swap VFO button and go to the other frequency. If you can do it between bands, you can do the same thing. That's obviously more than 5 kilohertz. So you could go between 20 and 40 and alternate CQs there. And then as you kind of get into the swing of it, and especially, so what happens during a sprint, it's 4 hours and it's 3 bands. And after the first hour and a half, 20 meters there's not very much activity. So one of the things you can do is maybe go to 40 to start with. There will be less activity there, less QRM, okay. And then come back to 20 later once everyone's worked everybody. And by the way, once everybody has worked everybody, they are starved for new stations to work. So they're going to want to work you. And you're going to find that your score is going to start catching up because everyone's worked everybody else. And now they want to work you as long as you can, transmit and make yourself known. Yeah. So I would advise you to CQ and then start easing into, when the pileups die down a little bit, start easing into answering those. And then you can start working what's called the couplet. So the couplet are those two QSOs where you break a pileup, work the station, they leave the frequency, you stay there, work one more station, and then you leave.
Wow. Yep.
I never realized all that.
Well, my interest is to
Huh.
figure it out and do it. You know what I mean? It's like I got to get myself over that. I mean, because so here's the thing. Like when I first got on 160, I thought, oh, I'll get into a 160 contest. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are all 160 experts, and they call that the gentleman's band for a reason. And even during a contest, they will stop. I've had guys stop and, hey, I worked on 80. How you doing? I've been shocked at that. So I got to get over that because everybody's in the same boat and everybody wants to help you. And, and if the more people
Yeah.
are involved in RTTY or sprints, the better. Joe's been huge. Joe keeps saying, like, hey, ask Ed if he'll do a podcast. The worst he can say is no. It's like, yeah, okay. So the worst I can do is get in the sprint. I was already frustrated with it, so that's not going to be new, right? So,
Yeah.
Hmm.
but it
Yeah.
is
Well,
now. Does
yeah,
that?
so I think you just, I think it's I think there's a mental part to it, especially getting started with what I just described. So I think you need to think about it and take a pause. And my advice is work above or below where the peak of the activity is, not too
Okay,
far, so people find you, and work the bands that aren't the hot bands right now, at that moment in time.
right.
So there's less QRM. And boy, I tell you, people are going to want to, because they can work you on the sprint rules, they can work you on all three bands. So don't fight the crowd at the beginning on 20 meters. Wait a half an hour, and go to the edges, and they're going to be dying to be able to work your call sign because it's going to be a new contact form.
Wow. The other thing I have found that contesting forces me to do is to really know my rig. I think a lot of guys operate their rig, but they don't really know it. And so in this case, like with a sprint, to be able to switch and know where your filters are tracking and do all those things you need to do, you really got to know your radio. And for me, anything that forces me to do that is a bonus, right? And so that was my other reason for trying the sprint.
Are you familiar with the bestseller from, I don't know, a couple decades ago by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers? You familiar with that book?
I'm familiar with the book. I don't have it, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay, well, basically, he goes through a number of real life examples of how you become good at something, basically. And his kind of mantra is with 10,000 hours of investment, you can become an expert at anything. And he talks about golf or whatever. And so, how that applies to what we're talking about is that's where I think contesting comes in. You have such an intense amount of activity in a short period of time that you start developing the muscle memory, the second nature, you learn the radio, um, much beyond what you can do from reading the manual or sitting down and playing with it. Just actually getting QSOs under your belt and in the log will make the difference. And so, even if contesting isn't your favorite activity in ham radio, it's a mechanism, it's a means for increasing your skill, your operating skill, which is going to help you whatever you do in ham radio is going to help your enjoyment, right? I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than to be trying to do something in our hobby and have something not working, or you're not doing as good as you think you should be able to do. And so practice makes perfect, I guess, is another mantra that we hear sometimes.
Wow. Great stuff. Joe, did I miss anything?
So far, so good. Very,
I'm
very interesting.
disappointed. There's one question I thought, Shu, you were going to ask. When can I run RTTY on 60 meters?
60 meters.
Joe is the 60 meter godfather, and
I like that 60 meters, Ed.
You what?
I like 60 meters.
I've actually several years ago, I worked a number of people on 60 meters from Aruba. Uh, and I haven't done it for a while. We don't have any 60-meter antennas, but I just tune up something that works and
Sure.
run 100 watts, and it works fine from down there.
wow, very cool. Well, I'm excited. I'm ready to jump back in and see what happens.
Yeah, you should. I think you just have to. It's all in how you approach it and what your perspective is about it.
So I actually feel better because it doesn't sound like I'm the first guy that said, "Boy, these sprints are frustrating."
Oh no, No, absolutely not. In fact, one of the biggest disappointments I have today is that we have very little participation and too little participation in the RTTY sprint. We run out of stations to work. There just aren't enough people that get on. And so I'll tell you another anecdote. For a number of years, I talked about the weekly RTTY test on Thursday nights.
Yep.
The NCCC, our club, has sponsored a CW sprint format on Thursday nights for, I don't know, at least 20 years. And we started RTTY 10 or 15 years ago. And now we have FT8 is going on. But we canceled the RTTY one last year because just wasn't enough activity. And for a number of years, in the NCJ sprint, the official sprint, we allowed you to work to get credit for duplicate contacts as long as you worked one other station in between. So you couldn't just work the same station back and forth. And when I started managing the contest, I got rid of that rule because I said, look, we should just not even have the contest if we have to have that big of a crutch to make it work.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea of the sprint is what I talked about earlier, is operating your skill. So anyway, that was canceled because we couldn't get enough activity. The next week, a couple of guys started the weekly RTTY contest, and there wasn't even an off week. They started it with non-sprint rules. You just work, so you can sit on a frequency and CQ. They have so much activity you wouldn't believe it. It's just immensely popular, and that tells the whole story about what your comment about sprints. There's so many people that are intimidated by it, and I think it's all. And I don't want to be pejorative, but I think it's all in their head. It's all how and I don't mean to be critical, but it's how we're so used to operating in a non-sprint way that the sprint is so foreign to us. But if you just think and just analytically dissect what sprint is all about, and then think about ways to operate it, like I was talking earlier, it's very approachable, I think. And everyone I know that sticks with it, that gets beyond the mental block, winds up loving it and enjoying it. I don't know anybody that done it seriously and figured out how to do it and then said, I don't like this.
Yeah.
So, Ed, you mentioned the three frequencies or the three bands. I'm sorry. So what are the three bands?
20, 40, and 80.
Okay.
It's always been that way for decades. Yeah, 20, 40, and 80.
You really bring up a good point, Ed, because let's say I'd never worked a contest before. I had no idea what it was like. And I just got with you and you said, okay, here's how this works. You're going to get on this frequency. Go to, for instance, if I were to start in the very next one, I'd go to a clear frequency and call and go from there. So I go there and you say, okay, when you work a guy here, now you got to move. You got to move up, you got to move down a little bit, and you got to find somebody to call, and you go call them. And when you work them, just go to another clear frequency, or you get that frequency, work another. So to me, it wouldn't be like, oh, it's not like I'm running a QSO party or I'm running a CW contest or something. This is how it works. So you're right. I mean, you're so used to sitting on a frequency or spot and pounce where you're using N1NM to move to the next one you need, boom, 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 and working them. So it really is just it's a mental hurdle that you got to get.
And so I'll go back to my Outliers book, the Malcolm Gladwell book. That's where that principle works against you, and you just described it. So if you've invested 10,000 hours in Malcolm Gladwell's language to sit on a frequency for an hour or to search and pounce for an hour, but not to interleave with every QSO, then your muscle memory and your frame of mind about what operating is all about and what's enjoyable and what you're good at, what you're really skilled at, is that mode. So the sprint mode is completely different and is going to be not very enjoyable until you get past the mental thing and realize, take back and look at the forest and see what's really going on.
Right. Yeah, because I guess the flip side is if you approach it that way now, when you say, well, I'm going to do a QSO party, well, this is boring. I'm just sitting here.
Yeah.
I got a good signal and a good spot and I'm working a bunch of guys. And okay, that's fun, but
yeah.
Very, very interesting. Wow.
Uh,
So what would be the next, you said there's two a year, two major
Yeah.
sprints
So
a year.
the next RTTY one is the second Sunday. Well, it's Saturday night, but the second Sunday UTC time in March.
March.
So
Okay.
it's in March and September are the RTTY ones.
Okay.
well, I use MMTTY, and I like it. It works fine.
Yep.
And I'm pretty much a search and pounce guy. I've got a bad back, so to sit in this chair very long, it's not very comfortable. So
Yep.
I can come in and search and pounce and work up and down the band, work a bunch of guys, then I have to get up and move around.
Move
So
around. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's the technique he used to get his wife, search and pounce. So that's why he's kind of partial to it.
well, what can I say? Yeah.
If it works, it works. Wow, really interesting. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Joe, did I miss anything?
Not a thing, but he mentioned our buddy Bernstein,
Yes.
Dave. So we had a podcast with Dave, and oh my God, I was just overwhelmed
Yeah.
because I'm an old country boy out here in the boondocks, and yeah, I really all these podcasts are interesting, but some more than others. And
Yeah. Bill, you worked with Dave, is that right?
I did. Yeah.
yeah,
He was in charge of the field organization somewhat when I worked for Rational, which was an IBM company. So yeah, yeah. And I would listen to him talk to those military folks at Magnavox, and I'd say, there's no way, I could understand what he was saying, which is only half true, but he comes off with such authority because he knows what he's talking about.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
people listen to him. And I'm a big user of DX Lab, and he offers both two-tone and MMTY.
Right.
And it's so easy. I guess that's the other thing. I'm kind of hitting myself in the head. I don't know why I don't try to use it more, because it is so easy with his software. Everything's built in. The Flex works fine with it. So, I can't really have no reason not to do it. Right. So
Yeah.
we got to get that going.
What kind of radio do you use day to day, Ed?
All Elecraft, ever since Elecraft came out with the K2. In fact, originally I was going to do SO2R with the K2, and then they came out with the K3. Elecraft is located just about 20 miles from where I live,
Oh,
and
really?
I know the owners, and they're good friends. And I've been on the focus team and the field test for ever since the K3 and the K4 and so forth. So, even 4 or 5 years before the radios came out, when they were kind of in the thinking stage, there were a couple of us that they were consulting with just to get outside ideas and bounce ideas off of and so forth. So
Sure.
anyway, for down in Aruba right now, I've got a number of K3 radios. That's what I use down there. Here at home, I've got a couple of K4 radios. And so I'm partial to that. Before that, I was a Kenwood fan. And then when I started in RTTY, I can't remember why. Maybe it was because of the dual tone filter. I started using ICOM Pro 3s,
Mhm.
and I still have, I think, 3 of those that I need to move on. But that seemed to be a popular radio for RTTY, 20 years ago. So I did got those, and then when Elecraft came out with the K3, I've been all Elecraft, since then.
So that brought up a point to me. How much power do you suggest we run on RTTY?
Well, the first thing is you need to figure out where the upper limit is based on your equipment, because unlike CW that is on and off, RTTY is on 100% of the time. So in RTTY, there's two signals, two RF signals. We call them tones
Right.
because in the radio they're tones that we hear, but out on the air they're two RF signals that are 170 hertz apart, and they're the inverse of each other. So when one's on, the other one's off. But there's always RF going out to whatever you have your power set. And there are a lot of amplifiers that you can't. I mean, if you remember the old Alpha ads where they put a brick on the key and
Yeah.
said that you could run it for 10 hours, key down. That's what RTTY is. When the message is going out, it's full key down. So that's the first thing you need to determine. And if you look in usually the first couple pages of your amplifier manual, it will say, you can run 1500 watts on sideband and CW, but on RTTY, don't go over 1000.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing you need to figure out based on your equipment. Beyond that, the only issue with running higher power is the bandwidth and the equivalent of key clicks in CW. If you remember, we used to have horrendous key click problems, especially on some of the Yaesu radios before they figured out how to adjust the rise and fall times. And the same thing exists in RTTY. And a lot of the radios, until we got to the the current generations, didn't have adequate filtering, wave shaping and so they were equivalently key clicking. Well, as you add a power amplifier to that, the more power you add, the wider that signal gets. I mean, it goes up exponentially. So that would be the thing that I would be most worried about. Beyond that, run as much power as you need to communicate. You may not need more than 100 watts. The majority of logs that we get in contests are low power. They're 100 watts or less. So most people do run 100 watts on RTTY. But I run full 1.5 kilowatts all the time on RTTY. But I have alpha amplifiers and I have Elecraft KPA 1500s, which can do that.
So you mentioned single op2 radio. Have you gone down that path?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that if you do RTTY a lot, you can wind up kind of like even more so with FT8 being bored. It was what I said a while ago. My first impression when we had the club meeting being introduced to RTTY, and they described it to me, and I said, "Well, that doesn't sound very interesting. There's nothing for the operator to do." And so, one of the great things about RTTY is it's a wonderful way to learn SO2R because your brain is not spending so much time decoding CW or listening to sideband or whatever. And so you can concentrate on the other skill aspects of operating. And so I really encourage people, even if they don't like RTTY, to use it as a test bed for building their skill on SO2R. But yeah, from the beginning, that first contest, the very first contest I did, the first RTTY operator I ever did that I described in 2004 was a single radio. Every contest after that has been with 2 radios. And I actually, for the last 10 years, I use 3 radios. So they're all interlocked. And usually that's only useful during the day. So I have 20, 15, and 10 all active. And so there's 2 ways to do physical ways to set up for SO2R. One is to have one computer and have both radios connected to it. And the software helps you manage, the synchronization and the timing between the radios. The other way is to basically set up like a multi-op station and have a computer on every radio, have them network together. And so you got keyboards and displays for each of those. And so you sit with these in close proximity and you just physically move between them. You don't have to move your chair if you can pack everything in close. So I could send you a picture, for example, of my setup for that. And I have the CRT or the LCD screens touching each other. And the keyboards, I use the small, they're full-size keyboards without the numeric pad.
Right.
So because with RTTY, you don't really need that. And in fact, with RTTY, if it's set up right, you're doing almost no typing. You're just hitting function keys that are sending macros. And so you set those up close enough, and it's real easy to keep track of what you're doing because it's physical. I'm on this radio, this screen, this radio, that radio. And so that's what I do. So I'm transmitting 100% of the time on one radio or the other.
Wow.
And that's, you almost have to do that to win a RTTY, to actually win a RTTY contest,
Right.
at the worldwide area. Bill, there was one thing that actually I thought about almost in the very um, beginning that I'd like to bring up as a tip that I recommend to people. So in RTTY contests, oftentimes, you don't get a copy. Someone sends you their exchange and maybe it gets hit by noise. Anyway, you get garbage. So you ask for a repeat. So let's say you send your exchange to me and you send my call and 599 and a serial number. And I don't get the serial number. I already know your call and the 599 doesn't have any information, but the serial number is unique and I've got to get that exactly. And so I don't get it and I ask you for a fill. Well, what do? Well, you hit your exchange message key. That's what 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 operators do. Well, guess what? 90% of that message is not what I asked for.
Yep.
And odds are that the noise that kept me from getting it the first time are going to hit that 10% of the message that I need. So in that same amount of time, it would be much better if you sent your serial number 3 times, right? In fact, it would take less time than sending the whole exchange message. Well, it's because people don't think about how to set up their messages. So on my messages, I don't have a message that sends my call 3 times or sends anything multiple times, because all you have to do is tap the key twice and it sends your call twice if you have your call once in there. And if someone asks for a fill, send what they ask for, not the whole exchange. To me, it almost borders on being rude. I ask you a question and you don't answer my question, you do something else. And in contesting, that's a real, and DXing would be the same thing, right? If someone asks for a fill, a call sign or something, don't send anything else but exactly what they ask for. And so set up your messages in RTTY to not send your call 2 or 3 times. If you want to send it 2 or 3 times, then just tap the key that many times. The other thing is, one of the debates is, when I send my exchange to you, should I send your call so that everyone knows that I'm working you?
Yes.
Well, I would say most of the time, no. You don't need to do that. You've already established the contact. I called CQ, you gave your call. I sent the call with the exchange. You don't need to come back and send my call anymore. But you hear that a lot in RTTY, and the excuse is because they don't want to confuse people that are on the frequency. So I have my messages set up without the other person's call. But if dynamically, while I'm working, if I sense there's QRM, or if I sense that there might be confusion, all I have to do is tap his call key, and it will concatenate his call with the message that I'm sending. So I advocate everyone set up their messages in a modular fashion so that dynamically you can create essentially a custom message that fits the situation, but you can have very short messages when you don't need that, right? The call is superfluous, but especially this point that I'm making especially applies to fills. And I would say the vast majority of people are just lazy and inconsiderate or not thinking because they don't set up a message to be able to send a fill that is just what the person is going to ask for. And they're not going to ask for RST, right? So you don't need that. You just need the unique part of the exchange, which is name or QTH or serial number, whatever the contest or the DX situation calls for.
Now, had you perhaps written about this in the National Contest Journal? So somebody had in the last.
I'm sure I have.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's been written about multiple times. Yeah.
Well, so the first time I read it,
still is a.
Well, I was one of those guys that would send the whole string, whether it was CW or it didn't matter to me. And the reason was, it wasn't because I was lazy or anything else. It was, at the time I thought, well, what's the big deal? You're talking about an extra 5 or 6 characters or whatever it happens to be. So, wow, I guess I could do that if they really want it. And it wasn't until I started getting rates that I realized, wow, if I can get I don't know, typically in a CWT, maybe 80 to 100 an hour in a good hour, right? All of a sudden it's like, wow, if each one of those took an extra 10 characters, that might be another 15 or 20 cues I could have gotten in. And that's when it dawned on me that not only am I slowing down, but I'm affecting the other ham as well. And if I really want to do this right, I need to learn to do that.
Yeah.
So what you're
Well, and
saying,
you're
though,
affecting everyone else on frequency. You're
yeah,
affecting everyone else on frequency that's waiting. And I would say there's another thing that people don't often think about, and that's the atmosphere that you create. So if you send an unnecessarily long message, you're conveying that speed's not really important. People don't necessarily consciously think that, but unconsciously, it kind of slows the world down. If you're sending really snappy and only sending what is necessary to be communicated for that moment in time, it conveys to everybody listening that, oh, you kind of sit up straight and say, oh boy, I better be, on top of this. This QSO is going fast, right?
right.
It's more of a speed thing. So it's not anything that we think about consciously, but it grabs you unconsciously, everybody that's listening. So there's a secondary effect by never sending slowly. There are a couple of stations in RTTY contests, K6LL and W6SX, that are the epitome of this. I know when they call me, I better darn well be ready to transmit, because they will send the exchange once, and their call once only, and when their exchange comes in, it's only once, and I better be ready to go, or there's going to be a huge pause. Where everyone else, they're sending enough other stuff that I don't have to be quite as nimble and quick on my feet. So if everyone were doing that, it just speeds up the entire environment of ham radio at that moment in time.
The other part is you always want to look like you know what you're doing, right? You really do. Whether we want to admit it or not, we do. So the more I can listen, like I'm trying to think, K4BAI, I think, is a CWT guy. And
Yeah,
I
John.
listen to him, and that guy knows how to run a pile up, and he knows, and I listen to him a lot, and I think I learn all the time. He's very efficient. So you pick guys like that, and
Yeah.
you listen and you learn, and it's like, okay, I no longer want to be the guy they listen to and say, I don't know how the hell he got into CW ops,
Well, it's probably less the negative than the positive you described about John. It's not just, I mean, he will send his call exactly the right number of times depending on the situation. He'll send it once. He won't waste any time more than once, but he's very canny at knowing when he needs to send it twice because of QRM or fading or whatever. And you can listen to him all day and pick up all kinds of
Yes.
very subtle ways that he operates and times things. And you can do that with a number of operators. And that raises the quality of operating for all of us if everyone is listening to that. So when I hear people complain after a DXpedition or a contest or something about operating techniques, all I think about is, look, if each one of us does what you just said, Bill, and tries to operate as best we can, that's going to be an example for everyone listening, and everyone is going to, we're going to bootstrap everybody up to higher and higher quality of operating. So sitting around and complaining about it I don't think is a very effective way to increase operating skill. It's to make sure that as individuals, each of us practice as good as we can, and that sets an example for everyone that's listening.
Yeah, terrific. Wow, this has been great, Ed. Really, really excellent stuff. I can't
Yes.
tell you how much I appreciate you doing it. You've
Yeah.
exceeded expectations, which were pretty high, to be honest with you. So, any closing thoughts you'd like to throw in
We
there?
didn't talk a lot about, well, just that, we didn't talk a lot about the details already, and as you know, I struggled as we were in our early communications trying to understand what we were achieving in these podcasts. and I finally got it towards the end, and it's met exactly my expectations. So, no, I would say that for any of us, if there's any aspect of our hobby that you get frustrated about, to maybe take a moment and sit back and try to look at the forest for the trees, try to look at um, uh, what it is that you're trying to achieve, what you enjoy in the hobby, and how you can make it better for yourself rather than going down the rat hole of complaining or being frustrated about something. And reach out to other people that you see looks like they're having a good time doing this, and I'm struggling with it, and try to figure out how they're doing it, and that sort of thing. We can learn an awful lot from each other, and I found that my fiercest competitors will share a lot with me. Sometimes they'll hold something back for fun, but for the most part, everyone will freely share if you approach them in the right way. And so that is good for all of us because everyone benefits from that kind of approach.
Boy, that's terrific.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, any final thoughts?
No, excellent presentation.
Wonderful stuff.
I
Yeah.
love it. I made all kind of notes, so I'm going to check my responses.
You know,
'Cause I'm
Okay.
not sure what the hell I'm sending.
well, at a minimum, Joe, you and I ought to do, we're what, 40 miles apart. We should do some 80 and 160 meter RTTY and go from there.
Yeah, and then send our logs in the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I have to say, now that I've experienced this podcast with you guys, I have to say you're doing a great contribution to the hobby, because there's lots of, there's reflectors and there's club meetings and there's conventions and there's lots of ways that we can network and learn from each other. And this is just one other dimension, and I think it's extremely effective. And it was great doing this with 0 slides. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of slide presentations, and I do a lot of those, but this is a nice change of pace,
well,
and very valuable, I think.
Your last email I read between the lines, and what I read was, am I supposed to have some slides prepared for tonight? That's kind of what I read. And I was like, no. We just want to talk. We just want to have a cup of coffee and talk and listen to, because it's hard to capture passion when you're looking at a slide. And it's so much easier when you're just talking off the cuff. And we go back to HP, and one thing I was taught at HP was, as long as you're a slide ahead of your audience, you're the expert, right? So, here,
a lot of the questions
ahead of you guys, I know what I'm doing.
A lot of the questions that we will ask our presenters like yourself is for our audience, so that they have a feeling.
And most
Sure.
of them.
Some of them are new hams.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that, because from my side, it's easy for me to go off on a tangent. And so for you to help steer that with your questions is really helpful.
Good. I did want to go back. The one question mark, there was 2 things we didn't talk about very quickly: Syria and Galapagos. Can you talk about Syria real quick?
Oh, okay.
How was that? When was it?
Yeah, so Syria was in November of 1993, and Rusty Epps, W0YK, and Tom McShane, NW6P, organized this, and it was a real political coup. We were the first group that got in there for a long period of time previously. And we got in contact with a retired brigadier general in the Syrian army, but he was in the telecommunications part of the army. He wasn't an infantryman or anything, but he was in communications. Really, really wonderful person, Oscar, and he was our host, and it was quite an experience for me. I mean, there were young, not even 20-year-old kids standing around with automatic weapons everywhere, in the country that we would go. And it was kind of scary. I took a little TS-50, if you know what that is. It looks like a 2-meter rig, but it's an HF rig.
Right.
that was designed, I don't know, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And I took one over and didn't declare it because it was little. I had it in my carry-on and didn't declare it. And we almost got kicked out of the country when they discovered it. Um, and when we operated, they had some government officials in the very next room with radios monitoring our signal. That's what they were set up to do. And I saw that and I said, well, wait a minute, I can just run a networking cable in there and you can still listen to our signals, but I can put you on our network and you can see everybody that we're actually talking to and working. And they were blown away that we would offer to help them do their spying on us, if you would. And so it was a very interesting experience. So it was during we did the CQ Worldwide CW contest there. And what I remember it was almost impossible to work North America because the path to North America was through Europe, and we could not get the Europeans to stand by under any circumstances because the country was so rare at that point in time. But there were a couple of licensed hams that we met in addition to Oscar, and just had a wonderful cultural experience there. Really, really enjoyed it.
That's great. And then the Galapagos.
And the Galapagos, so a friend of mine who actually just lives down the hill from me now, Trey Garlow, in 5KO, and Dave Leeson, W6NL, and his wife, Barb K6BL, which live 3 miles line of sight on the next ridge. In fact, my internet connection is on one of his towers. And Rich in 6KT all got together a couple decades ago and built a huge multi station down in Galapagos. And so I think it was a CQ Worldwide, I was invited to go down there and operate with K6AW, Steve Merchant, who unfortunately became Silent Key a few months ago, and Glenn Vincent, W6OTC. If you're in RTTY, you'll know Glenn. In fact, Glenn managed some of the contests before I took over about 20 years ago, the RTTY contests. And so that was my one trip down there. And that was also really exciting to see what they had put together. And they have since abandoned the station, and they didn't own any property down there. They made friends with a local and built the station. And so basically it was a sunk cost when it was all done. But they had tower made on the island and galvanized, and had four, I don't think 150 or 170 foot towers in a square, and had one band on each, and then had wire antennas between them, and it was just an ideal location, and they just won every contest they went into.
Wow.
For a number of years down there.
Very cool.
So I'd like to go back and do the tourist thing. I didn't get a chance to do that when I was there.
Who did we have on the podcast, Joe, who went to Galapagos and said that they went through the guest book, and remember Jacques Cousteau had signed it? You remember that?
Was it Rick NEHZ?
It might have been. It might have been.
Oh, the doctor, yeah.
Yeah,
He
Dr. Rick.
spent most of his life down there in Ecuador as a doctor.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Jacques Cousteau had signed in as a guest like 2 or 3 pages previously. That was pretty cool as well. So
did you know Bruce Butler?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, Bruce lived up in Napa, which is, one of the wine regions here in California. And for a number of years when he was around, he was in, I think, insurance or investments or something.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of clients, of course, who were in the wine business. And so he would get a lot of wine given to him that we used for awards for like the California QSO party and so forth. And Bruce was a fine gentleman. We really, really enjoyed.
I was on Midway with Bruce.
Oh, good. Okay.
Super guy. Yeah. He was a good guy. No question.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Ed, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it, and I look forward to meeting you. I'm already planning to go to Visalia next year. I know that it might be up in the air. I'm not sure, but
you'll be at Dayton, won't you?
I'll be at Dayton. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Are you coming to
Yeah,
Dayton?
so I go to Dayton every year. Yeah.
Oh,
I
great.
run the digital contest forum, and sometimes I do a digital contest dinner at the Hope Hotel. So yeah, I'm definitely there. I stay at the Hope Hotel there on the base or
Yeah.
next to the
Yeah.
base.
Yeah. So we'll host the DX dinner on Friday night and the DX forum on Saturday.
Yes.
So
Right.
one way or
So I
another,
go to the DX forum.
yeah,
I don't go to the dinner because there's usually it's either the top band dinner. I guess it's the
Yes.
top band dinner on
Yes.
Friday night
yeah.
that I go to. And Joe, you probably go to that, don't you?
No,
Or do
because
you go to the DX dinner?
we're always the Dex and we put on the DX dinner on Friday night.
So you're tied up with that,
So
yeah.
for 35 years or whatever, I've been Friday night.
Okay.
He's
Well, one
our,
way or another, we'll catch up with you guys.
yeah, yeah. Joe's our beer taster on Friday night, so we can't let him go.
Okay.
There's
But
been
you
a
can
couple
only
years.
send $5 for a beer.
So there's been a couple years I've been frustrated. Next year I'm going to the top band dinner and meet these guys and learn some things, but I end up going to our dinner. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I'll be at the forum. I'm 6'9", so you can't miss me. And by golly, I look forward to meeting you, and I think that'll be great. And Joe's almost always with me there, so
Oh yeah.
we'll do
Okay.
it. But I
Super.
truly appreciate you being with us. This has really been great, very interesting. It's got me excited to give this a shot, and I'm going to do so. And I will put all the stuff we
Great.
talked about in the show notes. So if people are interested, and if someone needs more information, there you go.
I
They
got
can
all my notes.
send me an email at the dxmentor@gmail.com, and I will route it to you, or I'll get them the information they need, and we'll take care of it that way. So with that, I'll say
Okay.
7-3, and again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a million, Ed.
Thank you, guys. 73. Have a good evening.
You too.
Yeah,
Thank
same to
sir.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
I hope you found that as interesting as I did. We recorded that on a Wednesday night, and I participated in the weekly RTTY contest the very next night, the Thursday night contest that Ed spoke about. I did make several RTTY contacts on 40 and really had a good time. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the DX Mentor. I would like to thank our sponsors, ICOM America, the Daily DX, DX Engineering, and the Southwest Ohio DX Association. You won't find anyone more committed to DX than these sponsors. I'd also like to thank our guests today, Ed, W0YK, and Joe, W8GEX. And of course, I really want to thank you, the listener and the watcher. Without you, there would simply be no point to this, so thank you very much. I would love to have your feedback, answer your questions, and provide help with any DX or amateur radio issues that you may have. If you need clarification on something or you just have a question, you can email me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Please drop me a line if you've achieved an all-time new one, received recognition, or you have a DX event that you would like us to mention. We would be happy to do that. If you aren't the email type, or if you're on Facebook all the time, check out our Facebook page, the DX Mentor Facebook page. Leave us your comments there. That would be most appreciated. If you're enjoying these DX Mentor episodes, please hit the subscribe button. You can also click like if you found this one particularly interesting. 7-3 for this episode, and thanks to my ex-YL Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.